Considering the unprecedented and unfair opposition that President Trump has had to deal with, his policy accomplishments over the past 2 years are very impressive. Even under normal political circumstances, the achievements of this administration would be considered near historic in just the first 2 years. But when you factor in the fact that Trump has had to deal with what now is an obviously corrupt and partisan FBI investigation, his administration's accomplishments become even more impressive. But despite Trump delivering on conservative Supreme Court justices, peace in the Korean Peninsula, and forcing the issue of border security to the forefront after decades of neglect by both parties, there is one achievement that isn't talked about as much. And it's this very achievement that may very well have the most lasting impact on this country, and possibly the world. Trump has ushered in a period of skepticism towards the elite-controlled media and deep state establishments that has never been seen before. An entire generation of Americans across a wide spectrum of demographics now all question the narratives controlled by the elitist media. This is no small task. For decades, the media enjoyed an unassailable position in our democracy. Any questioning of the press was deemed an attack on free speech. But now, tens of millions of Americans view the elitist mainstream media with extreme skepticism and distrust. Now some on the left and in the media would call this skepticism a bad thing. That Americans not trusting the press is a threat to democracy. But nothing could be further from the truth. The elite media is not some underdog as they try to portray themselves when they get called out for their propaganda. Instead, the media is a tightly controlled and small group of billion-dollar conglomerates which control virtually everything you see and hear. There is nothing underdog about them at all. They have the power to control the national dialogue however they see fit. It makes perfect sense that everyday Americans should question the messaging from these few companies that control so much of what we all see and hear. And for far too long, the media has been terribly biased and in some cases, controlled by corporate influence. Of course, there has always been talk of a media bias in the media, but generally the American public felt that what they read in the paper or saw on the evening news was mostly factual. But then something happened. Trump became president and tens of millions of his supporters saw exactly how biased and unfair the mainstream media can be. A big part of this was because Trump himself was not afraid to call out the press for what they were doing. No other president has had the audacity to rail against an unfair press the way Trump has. And all of his attacks on the fake news caused the media to go into overdrive trying to smear Trump and his supporters even more. But all they did was expose themselves and their overt bias for all the world to see. The mainstream media will never recover their credibility after what has happened over the past 2 years. The notion of fake news is now common knowledge, it's part of the culture. And now even long-time respected journalists are coming forward and saying that the mainstream media has failed at their core duty of fairness and objectivity. Just today, in an interview with the Mic Drop podcast, longtime journalist Lara Logan spoke out against the mainstream media. At one point even comparing what they currently do to propaganda. The 47-year-old Logan, an award-winning journalist and in the business since she was 17, stated that her comments could very well be career suicide. A reference to the fact that most media companies would not hire anyone with opposing views. But all of this skepticism of the mainstream media wouldn't have been possible without Trump. Conservatives have always complained about liberal bias in media, but Trump's presidency blew the lid off of it. Trump led the charge against fake news and his message resonated with his tens of millions of supporters. Those people will never blindly trust the media or its narratives again. Instead, they will always be skeptical and will always question what they see and hear from media sources, both ones they agree with and ones they oppose. And that's what makes this one of Trump's most transformative accomplishments, because skepticism like that will last for a generation, and possibly beyond.